does it look like when the worlds of music and activism overlap? That's the question that I look at on this podcast. It's called It's Giving, and it's hosted by me, Ingela Travers-Hayward. This week, it's giving August Ponthier. August is a non-binary artist that's now based in New York, but they're from Texas. And that fact goes on to inform a whole bunch of the social justice work that they do. The reason that talking to August was really welcomed was because, while I moved through the world believing that I'm pretty well versed and understand what's going on, there's still plenty of places that I am extremely ignorant about, right? Plenty of issues that I'm still ignorant about. And I think in my life, I've been really lucky to have people who have been really respectful of me, maybe asking questions that sound a little dumb or are questions that maybe I should have known the answer to. But because they see that I'm coming from a good place, that has allowed me to learn a whole lot more than I ever did before. And so I bring that up only to say that August's conversation and mine really is an example of that. August was really great with me asking all kinds of questions, but they also hammer home that very same thing that, look, you're not expected to know everything about everything, It's okay to ask questions as long as you're doing it in this respectful tone. And I think that's something that, I'm a straight white woman, and that's something that I can forget a lot of the time because I feel bad about not knowing or I feel scared to ask. But the questions that I was talking to August about, they were really great to answer, and I learned so much. And I think you'll absolutely feel the same way. If you're listening for the first time, this is my usual spiel. Please go subscribe and follow. It just gives me this huge wave of support to keep going. So I'm endlessly appreciative of that. And as always, this is just the first of many interviews. So come back next week because we're going to be talking to another great artist. Thanks so much. And here's August. August, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate talking to me.
I'm so excited to talk. I did just say that, but I will say it again. I'm so excited to talk about all of the things that I usually am just shouting into the void or at people about.
This is the place. This is absolutely the place to do that. So I think I'm going to start in just like a hugely sort of broad way. Is what's sort of the first example or one of the best examples I think that you have of music and social justice sort of being used in tandem? Is there something that sort of comes to mind when you think of like, oh yeah, that's an artist that really used their platform for social good?
I've been thinking a lot about how country music has been a more progressive genre historically than people give it credit for. I make music that is inspired by country music. And so one of the songs, when I think of like a song that created social good, I think of a song like The Pill by Loretta Lynn, which is a pro-birth control song. It's about reproductive rights and it's about autonomy. So that's one really great example of that. But in general, I mean, I also feel a really close kinship with Casey Musgraves, who has been talking about Texas. A lot of what I do is around Texas, a lot about trans rights in Texas, but I think that what she has been doing recently, talking about ICE and how it is affecting a lot of the communities in Texas, has been really incredible. And I just love another artist that really feels a big kinship with home.
So it's interesting you bring up country music because I think where genres of music are concerned, I think country music, I think it's changing a little bit, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it. I remember when I was younger, it's like you would ask someone, what kind of music do you listen to? I mean, I'm Canadian too, so I guess that's a bit different. But yeah, you would ask someone, what kind of music do you listen to? And they would say, oh, well, everything but country, And so I think it's always been this genre that is a bit misunderstood. And I think, you sort of mention it's more progressive than people give it credit for. What do you feel like is the biggest, misconception when it comes to country music? How are they progressive in your eyes? Because you know it so much better, I think, than a lot of people.
So I was born in 1996. And so country music, a lot of what I learned about country music was what country music became post 9/11 or after the war in Iraq started. And so a lot of country music post those events became very conservative. A lot of the music was about a type of nationalism that I did not feel like I identified with. And I think that that's a lot of the time what people talk about when they're talking about country music. They're talking about a very specific kind of country music that feels exclusive and only really encapsulates like a white American experience. For me, my favorite type of country music is the music that I look back on in like the 60s and 70s that is protest music. I love Willie Nelson. I love Loretta Lynn, as I said. I love Emmylou Harris. I think that country music for a long time was a storytelling vehicle for the working class to talk about their rights or lack thereof in the system. And whenever people talk about country music, I also think that it is, I would be remiss not to also say that country music has been very influenced by Black American music. It's really obvious the further back you go as well in country music. I think that for me, I was definitely of the mindset where I was like, I'm a gay person. I grew up in Texas.
Yeah.
I know the type of people that listen to country music, and a lot of them don't like my whole deal, and I don't feel welcome or feel safe with them. And now that I'm older, I realize that that was just one sliver, one facet of what country is, and that's definitely not where country music is heading.
Yeah. Do you feel like it is heading in a much more progressive, or it's moving in a much more progressive direction, and why?
For sure. I think for one, country music is just touching so many genres that it normally doesn't. I think it's charting more than ever. I also think like pop music has had more of a country sensibility. I mean, if you look at Sabrina Carpenter, for example. I also think that artists like Orville Peck or Tyler Childers, I think those artists are people who have been very vocal about wanting to make a space in country music for progressive people, for progressive ideology. And I think when we think about progressive country music, a lot of it feels like taking it in a new direction, but I actually think what it is reclaiming what it was meant to be. I think country music is meant to be a storytelling vehicle to unite all of us across class. And so for me, it was like a huge lesson because I grew up feeling like it was one way, and then I reconnected with it when I was older. I reconnected with Texas when I was older. And I absolutely think it's heading in a more progressive direction, even in the way that like queer line dancing is this huge phenomenon right now. I think that for a long time, people thought you couldn't be Southern and openly happy about it and queer at the same time. And my project hopefully is like a representation of those two things are not mutually exclusive. There's a lot to be proud of, and mostly what's a point of pride when I think of being from Texas or being where I'm from or being into country music, it's the people who make it more diverse, who make it a place to fight for. So
I think that's actually a perfect segue into sort of what I wanted to touch on next, which is getting more specific. And I think you're someone who is really cool to talk to because, you know, the social justice, the activism, advocacy that you're deeply passionate about, I feel like it's a really direct representation of who you are as a person. So while I don't want to say like, who are you? I think, how do you define what activism means to you? What segment of this whole world is really important to you and why?
I think a lot of the things I care about are linked, but right now I'm really focused on trans advocacy for transgender and non-binary people, for gender non-conforming people in general in the state of Texas. So I grew up in Texas and I completely just thought I was totally on my own in terms of the feelings that I was having and how I identified. And so now that I'm older, and because there are so many dangerous things being introduced in Texas, like the bathroom ban or Senate Bill 12, I have really focused a lot of my love and time and attention on trans people in the state of Texas.
Why is that? Because the reason I ask is because I think, you know, a lot of musicians get to the point where they have, you know, a platform, they have a voice, people pay attention to what they say, they listen to them. Why are you using it for good versus just, you know, I'm going to be a musician. It's really hard to be a musician just in and of itself, but I'm also going to take on this other thing that's really important to me.
For me, it was never really a question. I think I grew up uh, always feeling like I was trying to chip away at what was me.
Yeah.
There's this quote that I love, and I think I love it because it's so funny to compare me to anything that is as fancy or well loved as like Michelangelo. But there's this Michelangelo quote that's like, I just took away what wasn't David. And that's how I made David. And that's how I feel about myself. I'm always trying to get to the root of what I actually care about and who I am. And I'm always searching for something. And for a long time, it was based around identity. For those who don't know, I'm non-binary. I came out as non-binary in October publicly after 4 or 5 years of my career. So I made a big change pretty deep into my career. And for me, I think specifically for trans people, I mean, I do view them and us, if I include myself in that, which I do, as the forefront in leaders of change, at the forefront of caring about other people. And trans rights is intrinsically linked with things such as like reproductive rights when it comes to autonomy. So for me, it just never really was a question. I am just that type of person, and I just have that thing in me that if something doesn't feel right, or if there's something I feel like I need to talk about, I'll talk about it. And I do find it kind of funny when people say like, oh, not many artists talk about political things or talk about things that they're passionate about because it's kind of risky. I forget that that's even an option to shut up. So
I mean, but again, it's, you know, I don't know. This is just off the top of my head as I'm realizing as you're saying it, because you were born in 96. You know, I don't know if it's younger musicians now who just have this belief that like shutting up is not an option, you know, versus people who are older who maybe, I don't know, felt more hesitation or something. But yeah, like of the interviews I've done so far, it really does seem like people who are younger, it just seems like a non-negotiable, you know, and it doesn't feel like I have to do something I don't want to do. It's just more like, well, of course I'm going to do this.
I think for a long time, speaking up about what you believe in, and furthering causes that are near and dear to your heart could have been seen as like an extracurricular, but they are not an extracurricular for the people that are experiencing them. And for all of the things that have happened to me and all of the things that I've had to overcome and been through, I am still in a pretty privileged position. And so for me, I think that just as time goes on and we have access on the internet to information about what is happening around us, and we can see how the things we do affect other people, I think it's just more important to view it as a non-negotiable. In the same way that people who opt out of politics and they're like, I'm just not political, they are still opting in. They just are being ignorant about how that affects other people. I think it's very important to know how your output, whether or not you mean it to, can affect people. And I hope that the things that I do, especially when it comes to trans people in Texas, a state where everything that happens there radiates outward to everything else, I hope that it all counts for something. I hope it even just makes a dent. So
I think this also segues into, I wanted to talk about specifically about what you're doing, because from what I've read, you are one of these people who are not just talking about the issues, you are actually doing something. And I was reading Tent is one of the organizations that you partner with. Can you tell me more a little bit about what Tent is and how you work with them? Because I think, yeah, again, it seems like you're really boots on the ground where it comes to this sort of thing.
I love Tent. And I think the reason that the Transgender Education Network of Texas is near and dear to my heart is because I am not just like a fancy celebrity that chose some kind of organization to work with. I am like a mid-size at best musician, and I needed them when I met them. I needed Tent when I learned about Tent.
In what way, if you don't mind me asking? Yeah.
They are an organization. What they do is they advocate for trans people at the literal Texas Capitol. They are a policy organization, and they are providing testimony and support to people who want to change legislation around trans people in Texas. They also educate people about the experience of being trans, or provide resources to trans people who don't have support otherwise. They have crisis support. But at the time when I met them, I had never known trans people in Texas.
Yeah.
I had never reconnected with where I was from and felt like I could live a life there, or really felt like I could connect with people who were like me. Because when I started working with them, it was before I had come out. So I really needed to befriend and work with the people there to understand that Texas is not, Texans are not a monolith. What is happening there politically is so much more complicated than everyone there is a Republican that hates LGBTQ people.
Yeah.
Being a part of Tent has made me want to fight for Texas so much more, because they are a trans-led organization, they are a BIPOC-led organization, and they are staying there. They're digging their heels in, and they're saying that Texas is just as much ours as anyone else's. And that is something that has inspired me in my life across the board. It's touched every piece of who I am.
What do you think? So I think when people think of Texas, sort of similarly to country music, I think there is a lot of preconceived notions about how Texas is, and we've been lucky with our nonprofit. We've spent tons, we do Narcan distribution at ACL every year. It's been this place that's really welcomed us in. And so I think I know it a little bit better than most. I think you know it much better than I do even. And so I'm curious, what do you think people's biggest misconception is when they think of Texas and they think of trans rights in Texas? I think a lot of people, again, think, Texas doesn't give a shit about anyone. Yeah, it's full of Republicans. That's it. What do you think? What do you say to people who maybe have, prejudged Texas and the current state of it before you talk to them?
When people talk about Texas as a place where there are not many LGBTQ people, what they don't understand is there are more LGBTQ plus people in Texas than there are in New York. Texas is gigantic. For the record, DFW is around 200 cities and towns that is roughly the size of New Jersey. It is a huge area, which means there are so many queer people. When I was growing up, I think at 13, 14 years old, I stole Wi-Fi from a neighbor when we didn't have any internet and watched RuPaul's Drag Race in secret. Before it got
commitment.
Big.
That's commitment. Wow.
And what I didn't realize is so many queens were from Dallas. Dallas had this insane drag scene, drag pageant scene in my backyard, and I didn't even know. And that's basically every corner of the South. Every corner of the South has a queer community, and just because they are not a queer community that you participate in, or not a queer community that is able to be out as safely as other places, doesn't mean that it's not a thriving community. And so when people talk about it, like, of course, Texas hates trans people, there's not many trans people there, they don't realize that there are some of the best affirming surgeons in the country in Texas. They don't realize that there are insanely high levels of, it's still like a certain percentage of the population, but just because there's so many people, there's so many LGBTQ people there.
Yeah.
And it makes me so angry when people in more affirming places turn their backs on southern states, and specifically Texas, because everything that happens there radiates outward. There's a bathroom ban in Texas where you can be fined up to $10,000 if you're not using the gendered bathroom you were assigned at birth. And guess what? In New York, in Manhattan, a couple weeks ago, a cisgender butch lesbian went into a bathroom and got accosted for possibly being a transgender woman. It's like when things happen in Texas, they really do radiate outward because it is so big and because it has such a big influence. And just because you personally don't feel like you have to care about it doesn't mean it won't affect you.
Do you feel, I don't mean to sound ignorant, but I think it's really important to ask, because I think a lot of people are scared to ask these kind of questions, or are uncomfortable. How would you describe the current state of trans rights in Texas?
Well, let me get into it.
Yeah. I think, it's, you get these like sort of broad pieces or broad, pieces of news that get written about, again, from like outlets outside of Texas. And so you sort of wonder, like, what's actually going on? So how would you describe them right now?
It is dire. I mean, on just like simply a legislative level, it is dire. That's what feels so odd is it's so at odds with what we know about Texas, which is there's a lot of queer people there and there are happy communities there. I mean, I remember going to Austin growing up and being like, wow, what an incredible city to be a queer person, or going to Station 4 and seeing some of the best drag performances I've ever seen in my life, or Houston, which is a big blue dot in a pretty red state. But right now, as it is, they're enforcing a bill called Senate Bill 12. Bill 12 does a lot of things, mostly around trans youth. I would say trans youth have been hit the hardest out of all transgender people in Texas. It covers things like teachers cannot socially transition or affirm social transition in school, so they can't use, for example, if I was a child, they would not be able to call me August. They would not be able to call me to say their August. They would have to say my dead name. They would have to call me she, her. I grew up with a school that had a GSA, a very small gay straight alliance. That's not allowed anymore. You can't have clubs based on sexual orientation or gender. There can be no conversation about gender or sexual orientation in classrooms, which I would venture to say is usually on the side of not letting people be affirming, because I also grew up in a school district that was like, you can't talk about religion. And let me tell you, you could. Yeah. As long as it was the religion they were cool with.
Of course.
In addition to that, you can't have hormones, puberty blockers, or surgery under 18 years old. You can't have state-funded mental health care under 18 years old. It also functions as a sort of drag ban as well. But I think the most horrifying thing as of recent is Texas Children's Hospital has been forced by absolute ghoul Attorney General Ken Paxton to have a detransition clinic. We don't know what that means. We don't know how it will be enforced. We don't know if parents who are found quote unquote abusing their children by letting them transition will be asked to go there. There's a lot of uncertainty, but that is the most recent thing that's coming up. And to that, I would say, please, if you're in Texas, register to vote, because in November, he is up for re-election. And I would really love it if he would not be re-elected.
Well, so that actually, I usually end the interview with this question, but I think it's apt for right now. What's the best thing that someone can do? Either from afar, from within Texas. What's your advice for someone who's like listening to this and they're like, yeah, you're just feeling exasperated?
I think a lot of people that I've seen talking about this are trans people, and I would urge and beg people who are not trans to also please get interested and quick. I also think even if you're not in Texas, it's really important for, as I said before, it is just something that will radiate outward no matter what. I think that if someone wants to volunteer with Tent, they're always accepting volunteers. Even if you're like, I can't be somewhere in person, I don't have any money to donate, they do a love letters to trans people, love letters to trans rights. And truly, as someone who is in a pretty privileged position, and it has still been extremely hard post coming out for me, just having support in a physical form or just seeing someone's words can really change something for in a day, in a year, in a week. So I highly recommend that initiative as well. But in general, I think that speaking out and not allowing trans people to go through these things alone, only caring for each other, is so important, because I mean, when I even think of like, I'm a lesbian, when I think of gay rights, it's like it wasn't until allies started really standing alongside us and speaking with us, did things like marriage equality really feel like a reality. So I highly recommend everyone get involved, because again, even if it's someone who's into fighting for reproductive rights, the fight for reproductive rights and the fight for trans rights are essentially the same fight. It's about bodily autonomy. So I highly I highly recommend just speaking out. And if someone says something that's factually incorrect or sounds off, you do correct them, because normalizing this fear around trans people, even when it comes to like minors having gender affirming care, it's most major institutions support gender affirming care. So it's important to stay informed and talk to each other.
I think one of the big things, I'm curious, and you mentioned talking to each other. Yeah, it's what are those conversations like when you're talking to someone who is not, intentionally ignorant? They just don't, they're not quite aware of what's going on. What are those conversations like? Because I think a lot of the time, again, straight people or people who just maybe don't know anyone who's trans, this is one of these topics, like race, that like people just get so nervous about. They're like, I'd rather not talk about it, because I'm going to say the wrong thing or something like that. Like what are the conversations like when you're talking to someone and trying to educate them about this?
First I like to start out by saying, like, I know that I've been going a mile a minute talking on this podcast because I'm very passionate about it. But in my normal life, I definitely speak differently to different people about trans rights. I think we all start at different levels. And I feel like on this podcast, I feel like I can speak very frankly, very directly, and very in depth, because the listeners probably have pretty similar values or are thinking about activism on the same level or intensity that I am. But I think when I'm talking to someone who genuinely like does not know trans people and says exactly what you said, which is, I feel kind of scared because I don't want to say the wrong thing, I say, hey, I was scared. I didn't want to say the wrong thing. Even before I knew that I was non-binary, I was like, I don't know how to use they, them pronouns. I was terrified of hurting someone's feelings or offending them. And I am trans. I am non-binary. So I will say that. I will also say this. It's really important for people to know that if they go about their life and they're like, I have never spoken to a trans person, I never see a trans person, they're wrong.
Yeah.
It is just statistically impossible that anyone anywhere in the country has not interacted with a trans person. It's just they're not disclosing that to you. You don't know that. It's someone who's like checking you out at the grocery store, someone who you're talking to over the phone. These are not people that are like lurking in shadows.
No.
These are not people that are like waiting to do crazy stuff like to the country. These are people who are helping you in your everyday life. And I think that like all it really comes down to is autonomy. This is just a conversation about autonomy and believing people when they tell you who they are. When I came out, obviously, I had to come out to people who had never even used a they or a them pronoun in reference to a singular person ever in their life. And it was terrifying to do so. But gender is kind of a truth serum, and asking people to meet you at where you're at is a really important way to tell what kind of relationships you have. And so it's okay if it takes people a long time. For me, it's also okay when people mess up as long as they correct themselves. And I think that people need to realize no one is expecting you to get everything right in a day, but the trying is there, and the trying can be felt. You can immediately feel when someone is actually trying. And the fear of not trying and not even broaching that conversation is how we build an ocean in between trans people and cisgender people.
Have you had, or what's your experience been like using Instagram or social media to get your message out? Have you found it helpful at all to have these conversations, or is it sort of more like, oh my God, it's just a cesspool of negativity? Like, yeah, what's that been like?
No, for sure. I think that like connecting with people across state lines is important. I think that every year there are people that panic about how are there more trans people than there were the year before? But in reality, I think people are just connecting with each other and giving each other space to be themselves. And so me talking about these things online is met with people who feel really seen, who have a similar story to me. And at this point, just like being vocal about trans rights when I was doing it before I was out, which I did for years, or now, really does provide something for people that's so important, especially when you're in a big city. Like I live in New York now, and I live in Brooklyn now. It's easy when I like don't see someone who is not gender affirming for a really long time. It's easy to feel like this is normal, or this is how it is in other places. But whenever I go back home to Texas, it really does mean the world to just have someone in a public space be affirming. So I think that's been really helpful. Anyone who has disagreed with me or like been transphobic to me, it actually does not hurt my feelings, because they're just wrong, and I am sorry, but that can't hurt me.
I imagine, you kind of just have to develop this thick skin where that stuff is concerned,
Yeah, that can't hurt.
And I think, bringing it all full circle, how has being a musician helped with this? Has it? Or do you think that without being a musician, you would be doing the exact same thing and taking the exact same stances and moving the exact same way? Or has music really helped you in any kind of way?
Music is the love of my life, and it's what I've always done since I was young. So it's really hard for me to imagine a life where I'm not doing exactly this. It has helped me so much. My album that just came out, Everywhere Isn't Texas, which, as you can probably guess, is about me growing up in Texas, is funny because I made it without knowing I was going to come out at the end of making the record.
Oh, interesting.
And so I made the whole record, and when you go back, it looks like Scooby-Doo level clues on what was happening with me and my gender, because all of my songs were about identity. All of my songs were about looking inward. Handsome was about me having kind of gender dysphoria. Betty was about me wanting to change my name. Everywhere Isn't Texas is about being a queer person in the South. And when you listen to the album, it's so obvious that it was going to lead to me signing the finished work with a different name, but I didn't know that until after it was already finished. So I'm really grateful to my project. I think that it has given me the tools to imagine, and it's given me the tools to dig deeper and to really know myself. Because even though people can hear me talk on this podcast and be like, wow, they really are very direct and like know exactly what they want to say. I grew up an extremely shy kid who felt like I was the only person in the world that felt the way I did. And I did not imagine living this long. I did not imagine being able to fight for anything other than to just make it the next day. So my project has given me so many opportunities that I never thought I would have. And I'm really grateful for that.
Well, August, thank you so much for this. I think my hope with these conversations is always just people walk away more curious and inspired and stuff. And I think you really helped not paint this picture, but make people maybe less shy to have these conversations, which I think is really important. Because again, everyone's staying siloed and sort of being nervous to ask a question for fear of how they're going to say it. I think that doesn't help anyone in the long run. I think then certain people just remain ignorant. And again, that's not how change happens, So yeah, I thank you so much for talking to me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really I cannot stress enough. I was terrified to speak out politically. I was terrified to talk about trans rights for a long time, but I always ended up doing it anyway. And it's because one, I just had to, and I had that thing inside, but it is something that you do have to practice. I got the honor of being able to interview Lauren Ashley Simmons, who is a representative in Houston, Texas. And it was because someone on my team was like, hi, I know you want to be more involved politically with what's happening in Texas. Would you like to interview this LGBTQ advocate? And I was absolutely terrified, almost threw up 3 times. And I did it anyway. And it was a great experience. So I would urge people that to start small, maybe not where I did, but to start small and work up from there. And sometimes the small conversations are just about doing one small thing you've never done before, and then the next day doing the same thing. If I can do it, if I, very, very shy and scared to talk about it in my youth, can do it, then I really believe anybody can do it.
Bye.